The projector screen was already glowing white when I pressed play. Nobody paid much attention at first. That was the point. In a room full of people balancing wine glasses and polite smiles, a slideshow was the safest thing in the world. Harmless. Predictable. Photos from our life, arranged to look warm from a distance. The first image came up, and a few people smiled on cue. Megan and me in Portland, standing under a gray sky with coffee in our hands. Then one from San Diego, both of us sunburned and laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore. Then our dog on the couch between us, looking like he belonged to a stable home. I stood near the side wall with the remote in my hand and kept clicking. Nobody knew yet. Not really. A couple more slides passed. Birthdays. Weekend drives. A Thanksgiving shot her sister loved because it made us look solid. I could feel the room relaxing into it, accepting the version of us they had always been given. Then the black frame appeared. It stayed there just long enough for people to notice. 1 second. 2. Then the next slide came up. Her Instagram. Not the public one. Not the clean one with freelance work, brunches, and filtered sunsets. This was the other account. The private one she never knew I had seen. The one built for a different audience, a different life, a different version of her. The room went quiet in a way I had never heard before. Not loud silence. Dense silence. The kind that lands all at once. I wasn't looking at the screen. I was looking at Megan. She was standing near the drinks table in that dark green dress she'd spent too long pretending not to care about. One hand still around her glass. Shoulders locked. Face drained, but not confused. That was what settled it for me, even after everything else. She already knew. No surprise. No turn toward me. No searching the room for an explanation. Just that stillness people get when the truth they've been outrunning finally walks into the room ahead of them. I clicked to the next slide, and Megan lowered her eyes. Before that night, everything looked normal. That's what made it easy to ignore. We lived in Seattle, in a townhouse that always felt slightly too quiet for how much I was gone. I worked in operations for a mid-sized tech company. Nothing flashy, but stable, structured, and demanding in a way that kept me moving. Chicago 1 week, Austin the next. Occasionally overseas if something broke at scale. I told myself it was temporary. That was always the word. Temporary travel. Temporary distance. Temporary imbalance, while I built something that would eventually settle into place for both of us. A future that made the long flights and empty evenings feel like an investment instead of a trade. Megan never pushed back on that. If anything, she adapted to it too well. She freelanced from home. Design work, small contracts, flexible hours that filled the gaps I left behind. She had her own routines, her own circle. Brunches, gallery events, quick weekend trips she'd mention in passing. Sometimes she'd ask me to come back early. Not often, just enough to make it feel like it mattered. And when she did, I made it happen. I moved meetings, cut trips short, took red ice back just to walk through the door before midnight. I told myself that's what showing up looked like. Looking back, the signs weren't loud. They never are. It was small things at first. Items in the house I didn't remember buying. A bag placed just slightly out of alignment with the rest of her things. A jacket that wasn't mine, explained away too quickly. Stories about spontaneous trips with friends I'd never met. Names I heard once and never again. I didn't press. Not because I didn't notice, but because nothing felt solid enough to hold on to. Each detail, on its own, was harmless. Easy to explain. Easy to dismiss if you wanted to keep the structure intact. And I did. I had spreadsheets, timelines, deliverables. Everything in my life made sense when it could be tracked and verified. At home, I chose not to apply that same standard. I told myself trust meant not asking unnecessary questions. That stability meant not pulling on threads that might unravel something that still worked on the surface. So I kept moving. Packed bags. Boarded flights. Came home with small gifts and the assumption that whatever felt slightly off would correct itself with time. Megan stayed consistent. Warm when I was there. Independent when I wasn't. Never distant enough to raise alarms. Never close enough to invite scrutiny. It created a kind of balance. The kind that only holds if you don't look at it too closely. And I didn't. Not until someone else did it for me. Everything changed the day Claire sent me the account. There was no build-up. No warning. Just a message in the middle of a workday while I was sitting in a conference room in Chicago, half listening to a rollout plan that didn't matter anymore the second I opened my phone. Hey, this might be nothing, but I thought you should see it. A link underneath. Private profile. No name I recognized. No immediate connection. The kind of account you scroll past without thinking. Curated, polished, built to show a version of life that doesn't ask questions. At first glance, it didn't register. Luxury hotels. Rooftop dinners. Clean, expensive lighting in every frame. The kind of content that looks intentional without trying too hard. A life with no visible edges. I almost closed it. Then I didn't. I went back. Started again, slower. That was the moment everything shifted, not outwardly, not in a way anyone else could see. Just internally. A small adjustment in how I was looking at things. Patterns instead of images. Details instead of impressions. A pair of sunglasses in one photo. Reflection slightly off-center. A shape behind the person holding the camera. Familiar. Not obvious. Just familiar enough to hold my attention. I kept going. A short video, 5 seconds, maybe less. Someone laughing, turning slightly, sunlight catching the edge of a table. In the background, barely visible. Our dog. Same collar. Same small mark near his ear. I paused it. Replayed it. Once. Twice. It still didn't feel real. It felt like coincidence stretched too far. Like my brain was trying to solve something that didn't need solving. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. Then another post. Different day, different place. Same phone case I'd seen 100 times on our kitchen counter. A small scratch near the bottom corner I knew because I'd noticed it weeks earlier and never said anything. I sat there longer than I should have, phone in my hand, meeting continuing around me like it had nothing to do with me. At some point, the pieces stopped being separate. They aligned. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but enough. Enough to remove doubt. Enough to replace it with something quieter, more stable. Recognition. I didn't react. Didn't message Claire back right away. Didn't zoom in on every photo or start digging for explanations. I just closed the app and sat there, letting the idea settle without forcing it into a conclusion. Because once you see something clearly, you don't need to rush it. It doesn't go away. On the flight home, I opened the account again. This time, I wasn't looking for confirmation. I was looking for consistency. Dates, locations, timing. And somewhere over the Midwest, with nothing but the hum of the plane and a screen in front of me, the thought formed fully for the first time. I found my wife's secret account and realized someone else was funding her life. I didn't say anything when I got home. Didn't ask questions. Didn't change my tone. Didn't let it show in the way I moved through the house or spoke to her across the kitchen. I just stopped convincing myself it wasn't her. I stopped looking for explanations after that. Not all at once. It wasn't a decision I announced to myself. It just faded out. The need to make it reasonable. The habit of giving things the benefit of the doubt. That part of me had done its job for as long as it could. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was quiet. A different kind of attention. I started noticing without reacting. Listening without preparing responses. Watching without trying to interrupt what I was seeing. It felt less like living in the situation and more like standing just outside of it, letting things unfold at their own pace. Megan didn't notice the shift. Or if she did, she didn't question it. Our routine stayed intact. Morning coffee. Short conversations about nothing specific. Her asking about flights. Me giving vague answers that matched the version of life we'd been maintaining. It all continued. Only now, I wasn't inside it. I was observing it. The opportunity came a few days later without effort. She left her tablet on the kitchen counter before heading out. No hesitation. No second thought. Just another object in the house she assumed was neutral, like everything else. I didn't reach for it right away. I made coffee first. Stood there for a minute longer than usual. Let the room settle into stillness after she left. It mattered that it felt normal. When I finally picked it up, there was no rush. No adrenaline. Just a kind of steady focus I recognized from work. The same mindset I used when reviewing systems that didn't behave the way they were supposed to. You don't assume. You verify. The screen lit up without resistance. No passcode. That told me more than anything else. Confidence. Routine. The expectation that nothing needed to be hidden in a place she considered controlled. I opened what was already there. Messages. Not the ones she used when I was around. Not the clean, delayed conversations about errands or schedules. These were active, immediate, unfiltered in a way that only happens when someone believes they're operating in a separate space. I didn't scroll quickly. I didn't jump to conclusions. I read names, times, fragments of conversations that didn't explain themselves but didn't need to. Familiar tones used in unfamiliar contexts. References to places I recognized only after thinking about them twice. I wasn't angry. That part surprised me. There was no spike. No moment where I had to put the device down or step away. Just a steady intake of information, like I was reviewing a report that had already been finalized. I set the tablet back exactly where it had been. Same position, same angle, nothing disturbed. Then I finished my coffee. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel the same. Not empty, clear. For the first time since Claire sent that link, I wasn't dealing with a possibility anymore. I was dealing with structure. And structure can be understood. Once I saw the structure, I stopped trying to interpret it. I just followed it. The tablet became a reference point, not a trigger. I didn't need to go through everything at once. In fact, I avoided that. Systems reveal themselves better in pieces, especially when you let them repeat. So I checked it the next morning. Same time, same routine. Coffee first, then the screen. Hotel bookings were the easiest to recognize. Clean confirmations, neatly organized, tied to dates that meant nothing on their own, until I placed them next to my calendar. Chicago, Austin, Denver. My trips. Not guesses, not approximations. Exact matches. When I was out of town, rooms were booked. When I extended a stay, there was a shift. One night added, one night canceled somewhere else. Adjustments that mirrored mine too closely to ignore. I didn't react. I wrote the dates down. Then I kept going. Flights appeared next. Not under her name, at least not directly. Confirmations forwarded. Screenshots saved. Details that required one extra step to connect. But once you did, they lined up just as cleanly. Departure times that followed mine by hours. Returns that landed just before I came back home. Not overlapping. Sequenced. I sat there longer than I realized, looking at the pattern instead of the individual entries. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't emotional. It was efficient. Then I found the messages again. Different thread this time. A contact saved as Uncle Rob. I almost stopped there. Not because I believed it, but because the name itself felt like something designed to prevent a second look. Casual. Dismissible. Easy to scroll past if you weren't paying attention. I opened it. The tone wasn't ambiguous. Familiar. Direct. No hesitation in the way things were said. No distance you'd expect from anything close to family. Short messages. Clear arrangements. References to places that now matched the bookings I'd already seen. Nothing dramatic. Just consistent. I didn't screenshot anything. Didn't send it to myself. Didn't create evidence in the way most people would think to. I documented it differently. Dates. Times. Locations. Simple notes in a file that only meant something if you understood what you were looking at. The more I wrote, the less I needed to check. Because it wasn't changing. It was repeating. That was the part that settled everything. This wasn't a mistake. Not a moment. Not a lapse. It was a system. Built carefully. Maintained over time. Adjusted when needed, but never abandoned. A second life, running parallel to mine without ever crossing into it by accident. I set the tablet down again, exactly where I found it. The house was quiet in the same way it had been the day before, but now there was no uncertainty left in it. Just confirmation. And once something is confirmed, it stops being personal. It becomes factual. And facts don't need reactions. They just need to be handled. It stopped being just about me once I found his name. Uncle Rob didn't stay a placeholder for long. Systems like that always leave a trace somewhere outside themselves. You just have to follow the points where they touch something real. It took less time than I expected. A business registration tied to a phone number. A company site that looked legitimate on the surface. Consulting, investments, clean language designed to avoid specifics. From there, a name. Daniel. Last name matched across a few different listings. Enough consistency to remove doubt. Not enough visibility to draw attention unless you were looking for it. I didn't go deeper right away. I sat with that for a while. Because up to that point, everything had been contained. Megan. The account. The patterns. The structure between two people operating in a controlled space. A closed system. But a real name changes that. Names connect outward. I checked again later that night, this time with intention. Different sources. Public records. Small mentions that don't mean anything on their own, but start to align when you place them side by side. A business address. Then a residential one. Then a second address tied to the same name under a different context. That's where it shifted. Family records. A wife. Children. Nothing hidden. Just not directly connected unless you were mapping it out. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the screen without scrolling. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because the scope had changed. This wasn't contained anymore. What Megan built wasn't just parallel to my life. It intersected with someone else's in the same way. Same structure. Same separation. Same assumption that both sides would remain intact as long as the lines didn't cross. But lines always cross eventually. That's the part systems like this rely on not happening. I didn't feel anger toward him. That wasn't the point. He wasn't an unknown variable anymore. He was defined, measurable, placed within a structure that extended beyond what Megan had built. Which meant this wasn't just about uncovering something private. It had implications for more than one person, more than one household, more than one version of stability that was being maintained on incomplete information. I closed everything and sat in the dark for a while without turning any lights on. The house felt the same, unchanged on the surface, but the context behind it was different now. Because once multiple lives are tied into the same system, the outcome stops being controlled by any one person. It starts moving on its own. And at that point, it's not about exposure. It's about timing. She was already standing when the messages appeared. Not moving. Not reaching for anything. Just there, positioned slightly off-center from the screen like she hadn't decided whether to leave or stay. That's not mine, Megan said. Her voice was steady. Not defensive. Not loud. Just controlled in a way that would have worked under normal circumstances, if the room hadn't already seen enough to understand what they were looking at. I nodded once. Maybe. I didn't look at her when I said it. I kept my eyes on the screen, on the sequence I had already arranged. Not random. Not emotional. Just ordered in a way that didn't require explanation. The next slide came up. Same account. Different post. A hotel room. Subtle details most people wouldn't catch unless they had context. I had already given that context to myself weeks ago. No one spoke. I could hear small things now. A glass being set down too carefully. Someone shifting their weight. The kind of quiet movement people make when they realize they're part of something they didn't agree to witness. That's not. She started again, then stopped. There wasn't a clean sentence available to her anymore. I clicked forward. Another image. Another. Each one building on the last. Not in intensity, but in consistency. That was the part that mattered. Not a single moment, but a pattern that held together no matter where you looked at it from. I still didn't raise my voice. Didn't ask questions. Didn't give her anything to respond to directly. Because there was nothing left that needed interpretation. I turned slightly then, just enough to see her without making it a confrontation. She wasn't looking at the screen anymore. She was looking down. Not at me. Not at anyone else. Just down, like removing herself from the line of sight might slow things down. It didn't. I changed the slide again. Messages this time. Short ones. Clear ones. Names partially visible. Enough to connect without needing full context. No commentary from me. No explanation. Just sequence. She didn't speak after that. Not when the next image came up. Not when someone near the back shifted and quietly stepped toward the door. Not even when I stopped clicking and let the final slide sit there longer than the others. The room had already understood. And once a room understands something collectively, it doesn't go back. I set the remote down on the table beside me. No announcement. No closing statement. Just an end to the sequence. Megan stayed where she was for a second longer, then adjusted her grip on the glass like it had suddenly become heavier. Still no words. There wasn't anything left that required them. The room didn't reset after that. It shifted. Not all at once. Not in any obvious way, but you could feel it in how people moved. Conversations didn't restart. They broke off into smaller fragments, quieter, controlled. Eyes moved differently now, not casually, but with intention. Some looked at me. Most didn't. That was fine. I took a seat near the side, the same place I had been standing earlier. No urgency. No need to manage anything. The sequence had already done its job. What followed didn't require direction. It unfolded on its own. A couple of people approached, one at a time. Not questions, just brief acknowledgments. Nods. Low voices. The kind of interaction people offer when they recognize something has ended, but don't know where to place themselves inside it. I kept my responses minimal. There wasn't anything to explain. Across the room, Megan hadn't moved far. She was speaking to someone, Rachel. I recognized the posture before I heard the voice. Calm, measured, slightly angled away like she was trying to keep the conversation contained. Rachel listened without interrupting. Then she reached into her bag and handed Megan an envelope. No announcement. No emphasis. Just a transfer. Megan hesitated before taking it. Not long. Just enough to register that it wasn't expected. Her expression didn't change much, but her shoulders shifted slightly, like something had settled onto them. I didn't look away. Not out of confrontation. Just observation. Moments later, the door opened again. Another woman walked in. She didn't scan the room. Didn't hesitate. She knew where to look before she stepped inside. Her focus landed directly on Megan. Not aggressive. Not uncertain. Direct. That kind of certainty only comes from prior knowledge, not discovery. The room adjusted again. Subtle, but clear. People made space without being asked. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Movement slowed, then paused entirely as she crossed the floor. She didn't acknowledge me. Didn't need to. Whatever connection brought her there, it didn't involve me directly. I was just part of the structure that revealed it. She stopped a few feet from Megan. No raised voices. No immediate reaction. Just presence. Megan didn't step back. Didn't step forward either. She held the envelope in one hand, her glass in the other, like she hadn't decided which one mattered more. I stayed where I was. Didn't intervene. Didn't redirect. Because at that point, the situation wasn't mine to manage anymore. It had expanded beyond that. Multiple threads, all intersecting in the same place at the same time, each carrying its own weight, its own consequences. And once that kind of momentum starts, it doesn't need help. It moves on its own. She started packing 2 days later. Not immediately after that night. Not in a rush. The delay felt intentional, like she needed time to let everything settle into something she could move through without losing control completely. I didn't ask when she began. I noticed it the way I had noticed everything else, through small shifts. Drawers left open a second longer than usual. Closet space changing in subtle increments. The absence of things I hadn't paid attention to before. By the time it became visible, it was already in progress. I was at the kitchen table when she carried the first box past me. Medium-sized, taped cleanly, labeled in her handwriting, though I didn't read what it said. It didn't matter. She didn't look at me. Set it down near the door. Turned. Went back for another. The house was quiet in a different way now. Not tense. Not heavy. Just transitional. Like a space between states. I stayed where I was, one hand resting on the table, watching the rhythm she had settled into. No wasted movement. No hesitation. She had already decided what belonged to her, and what didn't. At some point, she stopped. Not because she was finished, but because she had reached a part that required acknowledgement. She stood across from me, one hand on the back of a chair, the other empty now. I hate you. The words came out flat. Not loud. Not emotional. Just stated. I looked at her then. Really looked, the same way I had in that room with the projector, without trying to influence what I was seeing. There was no anger in her expression. No visible frustration. Just something closed. Final. I nodded once. Didn't respond. There wasn't anything useful to say to that. No version of a reply that would change the direction things were already moving in. She waited for a second. Maybe expecting something. Maybe not. Then she turned and continued packing. Another box. Then another. Each one carried past me, placed near the door, forming a line that gradually defined the exit she had already chosen. No raised voices. No arguments. No attempt to revisit anything that had already been exposed. Because there was nothing left to negotiate. By the time the last box was set down, the house looked the same from a distance. Furniture still in place. Walls unchanged. Light coming through the same windows. But the structure behind it had been cleared. She picked up her keys from the counter without hesitation. Paused for half a second near the door, not to look back, just to adjust her grip on what she was carrying. Then she left. The door closed without force. No sound beyond what it needed to make. I didn't get up right away. Didn't follow. I just sat there, listening to the quiet settle into something stable again. There was nothing left to prove. Nothing left to uncover. Everything that needed to happen had already happened. I went back to work the next morning. Same alarm. Same routine. Coffee, emails, a calendar already filled with things that needed to move forward whether I was ready or not. Nothing about the job had changed. Only the reason behind it. For a long time, everything I did carried a second purpose. Every trip, every late night, every adjustment, it all pointed somewhere shared. Something we were supposed to arrive at together. That part was gone. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just removed. And what was left felt cleaner. I didn't think about her while I worked. Not because I was avoiding it, but because there was nothing left unresolved enough to pull my attention. The questions had already been answered. The structure had already collapsed. There was no noise left behind. Just space. I stayed later than usual that week. Not out of necessity, but because it made sense to. Work had always been something I understood. Clear inputs, measurable outputs, defined outcomes. No interpretation required. When I came home, the house felt different. Not empty. Accurate. Everything that remained was exactly what it appeared to be. No overlap. No second layer running underneath it. I left things where they were. Didn't rearrange. Didn't replace. There was no need to rebuild anything immediately. Stability doesn't always come from adding something new. Sometimes it comes from removing what wasn't real. I slept better than I expected. Woke up without the quiet weight that had been there for longer than I realized. And for the first time in a while, moving forward didn't feel like effort. It just felt like direction. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.